All right, it is Saturday morning and it is cold outside. The wind's blowing. So it's a perfect day to work on a transmission. We are ready to get busy on the main shaft assembly of this transmission. First thing we're going to do is this is your 5/6 in reverse shaft assembly. And it just basically tilts back. See these notches here? They engage in your selector plate. So as you're shifting, it'll either move these forks or it'll flip over and grab these and start moving these shafts. So this assembly tilts back, then you can simply lift it up out of the case and set it aside. Okay, next we need to remove the countershaft assembly over here. It basically, as far as rebuild, just needs bearings on each end. So we'll just take it out for now, get it out of the way. You can tilt your main shaft assembly over a little bit, lift this up, and work it out. You can see, just got tapered bearing on each end. So we'll set this out of the way. Next comes your main shaft and your shifter fork. And this is the main assembly that we'll be rebuilding right now. And to pull it out, take a hold of your shifter forks and the shaft and just raise it all up out in one piece. We'll take it over and put it on the workbench. When you pull that up, make sure this little pivot assembly, there is a roll or a steel pin that goes through that shaft that fits down in this slot. So make sure it just slides in there. So when you pull that out, make sure you don't drop it somewhere along the way. We'll just set this aside and remember to put it in later. And as I was telling you earlier, your input shaft, that looked like one big long shaft, but they're separated here. There's a bearing here. The race of the bearing is down inside here. And then the rest of that main shaft came off. And this is your input shaft with a bearing there. And when you go into fourth gear, see the teeth here? That synchro just drops down and locks this input shaft straight onto the main shaft. That's how you get that. That's how you get that straight through the transmission power transfer. And we'll be changing the bearing here, and we'll be pulling out the race here to change it. And then we'll set this out of the way. Down in both of these holes on the faceplate are the bearing races. There we go. Pain in the butt, but they just slide down in there. Underneath those are shims. And these are what we'll be setting to set the preload on all those bearings up through the transmission. So once we get it bolted together, we will use a dial indicator, check to see how much slop we've got, and then we'll pick out the right shim to put in here to give it like 0.02 of preload. So basically, if we take that shim out, I'll explain all this later too, but we take that shim out, we put the transmission bolted back together, the case on it and everything. We measure it, it's got 0.03 of clearance. You would want to put a 5,000 shim in that hole to give it 0.02 of preload. Same deal in this hole to shim up the counter shaft. Right now, I'm just going to leave this. We'll take it and clean it, put new seals, because the input shaft seal is right here. There's shaft seals under here for the shifter. We'll worry about that later. Right now, we're going to go over and work on the main shaft. Once you have the main shaft and the forks over to the workbench, this assembly simply slides off. See the pads down there, those are the ones we'll replace with the bronze. And they simply fit down into these synchronizer sliders. So before we get to taking this main shaft apart, I'll show you a little bit about the shifter fork. When you're in the car shifting, you're taking this rod, moving it back and forth like that, and twisting it. And see, it's got a detent, or it's got a pin here, and it's got arms there that slide into each one of these arms that go to the forks. So if you're moving like the 1-2 fork, it would slide in here. And then as you move back and forth like this, it moves the 1-2 fork. Now that pin, if you go to the 3-4 side, it has a notch too. You go down to it, that keeps the 1-2 in position and then starts moving the 3-4. And when you're in 5-6 and reverse, this swings on over and grabs those other arms that go to that other shaft to run those other forks. Basically, all we need to do to this assembly is we will change the 3-4 fork. So we'll just slide it off the shaft. We'll put this lever assembly into the new fork, put it back on here, and it's pretty much done. So right now, get that out of the way, and we'll start working on the main shaft. Got the new main shaft here to show you how things are positioned. These splined areas here and here are what drives the synchro hubs. So that's what connects that hub to the main shaft. These, of course, slide and grab whichever gear to lock it to the main shaft so that the counter shaft gear will drive it. As you can see, there's a big hub in the center here, so it's divided. So stuff on this side, your 3 and your 4, which your 4 gear is just sliding onto the input shaft. This stuff comes off this way. The 1-2, the gears, and the synchros go that way, off the shaft. Now we'll take off the 1-2 section first. You can see right here, there is an O-ring. Need to get that O-ring out of the way, and you can just discard it. It does not have to be in there. That is just for when they're assembling the transmission at the factory. It keeps that from falling off. Take a pick. And the O-ring just broke, which is fine. Get that out of the way. Next is this bearing, and it is a slip fit. So you slide it off the shaft. And like before, set this stuff in order so you can put it back on however you need to set it to remember. Well, this gear, this would be your first gear, driven gear. It also slides off. And it has a bearing in the center, which will be replaced. And you look at the points on the teeth. They're not new, but they're not bad either. So set that over with your bearing. And then comes your blocker rings. Now, I call all this stuff synchros because it all does the same thing. It synchronizes the gears so it can slide together. This inner part's your synchro hub. This is your synchro slider, sleeve, whatever you call it. And these, the parts that wear out, are your blocker rings. And those will be what we're replacing. And see, on this one, it's got a 3-piece setup. 2 separate cones that will be replaced, and then this ring, which I think this ring is the part that is hard to get anymore. But these 2 came in the kit, and I'll take them off and show them to you. You have a friction surface on this inner ring, and that's what rides, that's what grabs the gear. You also have another friction surface that grabs onto it. And then this one on the outside, which they're all tapered, hooks onto that. Now, if you look in the factory service manual, there are specifications to measure the gap in between the blocking rings and the gear to know whether they're bad. this gap here. We're just going to change them all, but the ones that I think are good, I'm going to save. I just save all the, I change them all, but I save what's good, because it's getting kind of hard to find parts of these transmissions, because this particular synchro setup was only used in the Corvettes and the CTSV whatever Cadillacs. So in case sometime down the road you can't get them at all, I might be able to make a transmission last a little bit longer by using some used parts. Not ideal, but doesn't take much space to throw them in a box somewhere and save them. All right, we are down to the hub now. And there's a spacer ring. I thought that was a spacer. Keep that in line. Now we're down to a C-clip. So we'll grab the pliers and pop it loose. Now this hub, we'll need to take it over. We can slide this slider off, but the hub itself will be press fit onto the shaft. Let's go ahead and pop this assembly off. It's kind of difficult working around the camera. Okay, that pops it out. Now this thing has some marks on it. I don't know that anybody's ever figured out how important those marks are, but just keep track of where they are so you can put it back in the same spot. And you also want to mark, which I forgot to do that before I pulled it off, but you want to mark this, the ring, and the hub to where they go back on in the same spot. And what I did is cleaned it off with a little solvent, marked where it goes. If you can see down in here, see those little divots? That lines up with this slot because that's where the key goes. There's 3 of those on each hub. So I also cleaned down in there, put marks on both sides of that slot. So we can set this hub over with the rest of the parts, keep it in order. Now, inside there, we have springs. And these are what holds the keys in position, puts outward force on them. Because the keys are what slides forward and hits those notches in the synchronizers that engage them. So these clips push out. They fit inside here and push out on these keys to keep them in position. And that notch inside that ring hits that little nub there. And that lets the key come over as far as it needs to engage the synchronizer, but then the hub can go ahead and slide on over it and completely engage the gear. So we've got springs on both sides of this hub and then the 3 synchro teeth. There they are. Or the 3 keys. And these are good keys. It's the 5th and 6th, but I always just change all of them. Right, we are down to the hub assembly. We'll need to grab a hold of that hub with a separator plate, put it in the press, and slide it off. Hey, fortunately, I was mistaken on this hub. It is not a serious press fit on that shaft. Some of this stuff, like that 5/6 gear, is supposed to be a press fit. Some of it's not. Instead of having to put this in the press, you can just take a brass punch and just very gently tap on the edge and it'll slide right off. I will finish tapping that off. You can see it's moved quite a bit. Just Make sure to use a brass punch so you don't damage your gear here. Like I said, I don't do these for a living or all the time, so I had to kind of remember what's what while I'm doing it. There we go. This one, pull that off. You can see that snap ring in there. That's not a snap ring, it's just a tension ring for those keys. Keep this in order so you can put it back on the way it went. And this one has a plastic spacer in between there. Unlike everything else, keep that in order. Next, we pull off the blocker rings for second gear. And like before, it's a 3-piece setup. Inner and outer. And I think these are made, these rings, since this is an older Borg-Warner transmission before Tremec bought them, or however that worked out. I think these are like a paper, like you'd find on an automatic transmission clutches. But the ones we'll be putting back in are carbon fiber. Wow. Yeah, look at that. That's a carbon fiber ring. And these are even different than the last set I got from Bruce at the Gearbox. And these are aftermarket, but I don't think you can get factory ones anymore. But yeah, these are all built different. Yeah, these are a carbon fiber. Used to, transmissions just had brass or a bronze synchronizer like this. Little ribs cut inside to grab on. But, and these worked okay on older stuff. These work fine in a truck transmission where you're not shifting super fast, not high RPMs, but once they went to cars that were shifting at higher RPMs, bigger gears, stronger gears, more mass, and they had to find something that would grab on better than just a single brass synchro. This one on this car is still used in reverse, which I'm not even sure why they bothered putting a synchro in reverse. I don't think most of my other stick shifts have a synchro in reverse, because if you don't put those in like first gear to stop the drivetrain, they will grind no matter what. But T56s have a synchro assembly for reverse. Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't pulled those new blocker rings out of the box yet, and they are different than the last three that I've, different in style on that carbon fiber material than the last three sets I've used. But this ring and this ring that had the friction material on them will be replaced. This ring gets reused, because it doesn't have any friction material. Still got the cone, but no friction. And these are hard to find and expensive. So we'll set this assembly over here. The rest of the parts. Now we should be able to slide second gear off the shaft. Here's second gear. Teeth are good on it. Same deal as before, a bearing inside, because these float on the shaft unless they're locked in through these. We'll put it with the synchros, and we're down to this hub here that's made onto the shaft. So that's it for 1 and 2, taking them off. Now we move on to 3/4. The problem with 3/4 is you have a bearing that's in the way. So what I normally do, especially on this one since we're replacing the shaft, I'm just going to cut this cage, take the cage and the rollers out of the way, and then I should be able to get everything off around it. If you're reusing the shaft, you'll have to pull that bearing off or cut the bearing off, whichever works for you. I normally replace them, so I would cut it off. It's kind of difficult to get behind it, like with a puller. I'll show you when we get it out. I'll get some side cutters and get that cage out of the way. Back out your trash. Now by taking that cage off, your inner race and the inner part of your bearing is slightly lower than what the shaft is. So everything should slide off past it without any problems. Now we have keep from knocking everything else out of place. We got another retainer clip that we got to pull out. There we go. Now don't worry about stretching it too far because they are getting all replaced. So that's out of the way. And that lets you slide your blocker rings off. It's yet got a different assembly. This little job, an inner ring, another ring, and then that ring. So put all that together, set it over, so we know how it goes back on. Get you a better view. You've got this ring going around. It's actually clipped into one of the teeth, or into one of the keys, because first and second had billet keys, factory. Second and third, we're back to this stamped steel junk. So I'm going to pop that clip out right now and get it out of the way. I think. Gotta quit putting my screwdriver up. Every time I put it up, I need it again. There's the wire clip. Pop that out. And this one has a mark right there on the synchro. So I will just mark the matching spot on the hub. That way I'll know how to put it back in. Now this one is different too. Let me pull it off. It's got a thicker side and then a thinner beveled side. So like everything else, make sure you put it back in the same spot. There's the indentions for the keys. We'll put that over there. Clean that up with a little solvent so I can mark it. And I just want these to go back together, I'm assuming, so they never have any trouble sliding. I mean, the factory service manual specifies, mark them and put them back where you got them. Okay, so we're back. Sliding this hub off. I don't think it's a press fit either. We'll see. Nope, it's moving. I'll move the camera out of the way so I can work on this. You've seen me knock one of those off. It's the same deal. Okay, that hub slid out. I went ahead and put it back in its proper orientation in the slider. Now we'll pull off another synchro pack. And this one, yet again, a little different. Now these two rings, this ring here, and then a engagement ring. like an intermediate ring in between the synchros and the shaft. So that's on there. Put that in order. Now your third gear slides off. It has a big spacer ring there. We'll drop it right in with that. Teeth on third gear are not new, of course, but very usable. Certainly not worth $150 for a gear. And then another bearing. Drop that in there, and there is a bare shaft that gets recycled into something more usable. All right, I think I'm going to just post this up as a standalone video, and then we'll have a separate video putting the shaft back together. That way, if you guys are looking for something particular, it's easier to find. So, thanks for watching.